Okay, so just some ground rules for today, because there's quite a few of us. Most of you who've heard, if you can just rename yourself with your full name and where you're from, just go to the participants panel and click on your name and then more, and then rename yourself. That's really helpful for us. And if you'd like to put your camera on, that's good. I know some of you can't. While the speakers are on, you don't have to leave it on, but if you want to ask a question, it's good if you have your camera on, if that's possible. And later in the session, we're going to split into 2 breakout rooms. We're going to have an agricultural pastoral one and a southwest. We didn't have quite enough participants to have one from the pastoral region, but if in the future we have a specific large group from the pastoral, we're definitely prepared to do a specific one for the pastoral. So, and you'll be able to select which room you want to go in. So before we start any of that, I'd like to introduce Rebecca Rees, who's the Program Director of Biosecurity at DPIRD, and Rebecca Heath's also here from DPIRD, the Senior Development Officer of Biosecurity Governance, Strategy and Performance. So I would like to hand over to Rebecca to give us an outline of the BAM Act review. Thanks, Rebecca.
Well, thank you very much for having us today, both Becks. It seems to be that the BAM Act review is all about Becks from lots of different organisations, so apologies for the confusion if you get your Becks muddled. I've just got a couple of slides on the BAM Act, so we'll do that and then see if anyone's got any questions. And Other Beck is a font of knowledge in this space, so I might defer to her today on some of the questions. Okay, so I will share my screen. Okay, can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, so the Biosecurity Agricultural Management Act, what is it about? So basically it's WA's primary biosecurity legislation, and it provides the state with means to control pests, whether they're coming in or once they're here. It also controls agricultural and veterinarian chemicals, ensures that there's safety and quality of agricultural products, and raise funds for biosecurity purposes. So the Minister has appointed a panel to review the BAM Act in accordance with the Act, which is meant to occur every 10 years, which is why we're here today. Okay, in terms of the BAM Act review processes, there's 3 key stages to it. At the moment, we're in stage 1 to identify key themes, and stakeholders are invited to make submissions or complete a survey or both by the 27th of July to help inform what those key themes are. Once the panel has considered those submissions and identified key themes, there'll be more opportunities for engagement with key stakeholders. And then once that work has been undertaken, there'll be a 3rd opportunity to provide comment on what the review panel have identified out of that process. Now, we already know that it's likely that the RBGs and the declared pest rate will be one of those key themes, which is why we're here today. So I'll hop out of there and see if there's any questions.
Okay, does anyone have some questions from Rebecca on the BAM Act?
Would you like me to hop on to, oh, here we go, Mary.
Yeah. Does the BAM Act apply over all lands?
Yes, it does. And what in particular were you thinking of?
Well, things like control of, foxes, rabbits, they don't abide by any boundaries. And it's a big issue, control of, well, in urban bushland of foxes and feral cats and so on. Yep.
Yeah, it does apply over all land, but depending on the pest, there's different means available to state to manage those pests. And then what the state does in practice with those means established by the Act can vary somewhat. Beck, did you want to add to that?
No, I guess the only thing I would add to that is, like Beck said, there's different, I guess, categorizations of pests. So there's rabbits and foxes are category 3 management pests compared to other pests that might be targeted for eradication. So the BAM Act does give those different levels of categorization to different pests and diseases.
So what does category 3 imply?
They're management or control pests. So under the Act, all landholders have the responsibility to control those pests on their land.
Okay, so the department doesn't have any role in coordinating that control. With things like foxes that move across the landscape so much, it's a big issue.
The department doesn't coordinate those control on those C3 pests. That's right, Rebecca, or Beck.
Yeah, the DPR and the Declared Pest Rate Recognised Biosecurity Group model does provide funding for that kind of pest management at the moment. Jo.
Beck and Beck, I was a project officer for Warren Biosecurity Inc., which has now been deregistered. It's actually been over a year. Since we failed to get a declared pest rate over the line, Talking Rbg started up. So I'm wondering if you could update us on what changes to how things are managed for recognised biosecurity groups since Talking Rbg started up, because I know there were a lot of issues, particularly around communication and information sharing. So can you update us as to what's happened since then?
It might be helpful if I've got a couple of slides on the Rbg DPR model, so perhaps we can park those questions for there, and if there's any others on the Act more broadly, we'll do those now, and then we can move on to that. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Linda, did you have a question? Linda Matthews?
Yes, I live in Albany. So does the Act also cover like shipping? Because they often come in with water as ballast, and then they have to dump that water before they can take on their freight of the grain and wood chips. So does it also cover the sea? Because I know that some of these ships can be carrying pests in the water.
I will get Beck to talk to this one. The Act does have certain provisions around importation, although a lot of that is managed by the federal government. Beck, would you like to expand on that?
Yes, thanks. Yes, so the ballast water is covered under Commonwealth or federal legislation. The WA legislation just applies to the WA borders, so the international borders are covered under the Commonwealth.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just...
Mary, yep.
Another question. What about, does the BAM Act, how much does it include environmental weeds? I mean, weeds, agricultural weeds can be declared presumably, but
environmental weeds, so environmental weeds, agricultural weeds, and weeds that impact I guess human amenity, social amenity, can all be declared under the BAM Act, and there's certain scientific criteria which are applied to that process in practice to determine which pests are categorised.
So the environmental weeds list that was signed off by the Environment Minister many years ago, are they all declared weeds?
I can't answer the specifics on that one. Beck, can you add to that?
I can't answer it entirely either, but I don't think so. I think so under the BAM Act, the weeds that are declared have been declared by the Minister for Agriculture and Food.
Yeah. Well, agriculture used to be involved with all the weeds, but yeah, it's changed.
Yeah. But like Beck said, environmental weeds certainly can be declared under the BAM Act.
Can they? But so which is the lead agency for environmental weeds? Is there one?
The BAM Act itself is intended to be the state's primary legislation for biosecurity concerns, but obviously state government is a big entity and there are lots of different agencies involved in the management of pests and weeds.
So are you saying the Agriculture Department is the lead agency for environmental weeds or not?
No, what I'm saying is that there's lots of agencies involved in the administration of all the different pieces
I
of
realise
legislation.
that.
Yeah.
In terms of the lead agency.
For environmental weeds.
Yeah.
It's the lead agency for this piece of legislation, which is what the review is about. Beck, do you have anything to add to that one?
No, like you said, yes, our Department of Primary Industry is the lead agency for the BAM Act and the administration of that Act.
I understand that, but it doesn't answer the question.
Joe?
I wonder if I might help with that a little bit. In terms of the BAM Act, which is the Biosecurity and Agricultural Management Act, but DPIRD, as I understand it, only deals with environmental weeds if they also happen to be a declared weed or a declared pest on the list. So a lot of them, what were pests a few years ago, have been removed from that list, particularly Category 3, as they became too difficult and expensive for the department to control themselves. So that's why they become C3 and responsibility of the private landowner, whereas C1 and C2 are at the border or in small localised populations. So if the environmental weed doesn't coincide with the list of declared species, then no, the department has no responsibility for it.
So I guess what's in terms of the BAM Act review process, there's the legislation which sets up certain powers and means for the state, and then there's what the state does with that in practice. So in terms of the BAM Act review process, it's about looking at what are those means established and are they the right means? And then the different agencies that might come into play with that is a secondary question for how that piece of legislation is used. When it comes to pests, there are environmental pests and there are social pests and there are agricultural pests, and then there are pests that are all three. And so the lines between what's ag and what's environmental and what's social is not always clear cut, and that's where there's that importance to work across agency and where that is really material for how this all works in practice once that infrastructure of legislation is in place.
Okay, thank you very much, Rebecca. So maybe if you move on to the next to give us an overview and update of the RBGs.
Sure.
And declared pest rate from DPIRD's perspective.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so I've kept it very high level because I understand that's how you like to run these sessions. So what is the declared pest rate and recognised biosecurity group model? So under the Act, the state raises a declared pest rate. And at the moment, there are in practice 14 rating areas and 65 local government districts rated. Okay, so across the state, there's about 22,000 landholders who are charged a rate, and that raises about $3 million a year. Those funds under the Act are matched 50-50. Okay, so that doubles the funds available in the declared pest account. Okay, the funds in the declared pest account have to be used on declared pests. And one of the mechanisms available for use of those funds is to provide them to recognised biosecurity groups. And at the moment, all of those funds go to 14 existing recognised biosecurity groups to support landholders manage pests, widespread and established pests, and to coordinate landholder pest management efforts. Now, what that looks like across the state varies quite significantly. Up in the rangelands, where there's 5 recognised biosecurity groups, there's only about 330 ratepayers who are paying thousands of dollars a year towards the rate. Okay, and the ratio of RBG to ratepayer, we're only looking at about 67 ratepayers per RBG. When you come into the agricultural area, there's around 6,000 ratepayers, and the average rate is only $138, and there's 6 RBGs to every 1,000 ratepayers. By the time you come in the southwest, there's 15,000 ratepayers and the average rate is only $42, but the ratio of RBG to rate is 3 RBGs to about 5,000 ratepayers. So in terms of the model, whilst the state raises the rate and the funds are provided to RBGs to support landholders manage pests, the ratepayers and their relationship with the RBG is critical to how that works in practice. And as you can see, it's a very different story across the state. And I'll leave it for Linda to talk about, what the groups do in practice, because she'll speak much more eloquently than I could on that. So that's a very, very quick helicopter view of what the model is and what it provides to recognised biosecurity groups who are independent associations and funded through that model to support landholders manage pests. So I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Rebecca, are there any emerging groups? We heard from Joe before that, Warren had tried to get up and to get rating, but they didn't. Is there anything else sort of happening around the state in terms of more groups coming on stream?
At the moment, no. The department's not pushing for more groups to be established at this point in time. The minister's made it quite clear that she's keen for a review of the model to be undertaken, and it's worth us going through that process before, it's expanded or not, as the case may be.
Okay, that's interesting. So when's that going to happen?
So as part of the BAM Act review process, it's running sort of as part of it and in parallel to it. So some of it will be picked up by the BAM Act review panel process and some of it will fall outside of it. But at the moment, the current planning is for it to deliver around the same time that the panel delivers its works.
Wow, that's really interesting. That's going to be hotly watched, isn't it? Because it has a contentious history, as we all know, the declared pest rate. So the fact that it's being reviewed means that it's been heard, that it's not necessarily been everyone's cup of tea, if I can put it mildly.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see what the findings are and then the determination of whether that's a working model to go forward. That's great. Thank you.
Anyone else have questions from Rebecca or from DPIRD?
Joe?
Yeah, it's interesting that the BAM Act provides for a declared pest rate, but it doesn't state anywhere in the Act how that needs to look. So to my mind, that gives a lot of scope to rejig the whole thing to make it more workable across the state. On your slide, Beck, it said, Rebecca, that WA, it raised the DPR across WA, but that's not true. If we can't get community support in a particular area, such as our prescribed area in the Southern Forest, then the DPR is not matched. So that funding isn't there, whether we like it or not.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Also interesting, I wonder if you could comment on this, on that note. This year, Carnarvon's Biosecurity Group has withdrawn, and the funding that had been put aside for Warren Biosecurity, had we gotten over the line, has also been withdrawn from the budget. So would you like to comment on that?
Sure. So what happened in the budget there was, so what happens with the state budgeting for these funds is there's an estimate put forward in terms of how much is going to need to be matched. And that sits in the forward estimates and gets revised and updated as things go forward. So when it became clear that Warren wasn't going to have a rate, it was no longer needed to be there in the budget. And the same with Carnarvon growers, which is different to Carnarvon rangelands. That was just an adjustment of reflecting the reality. The amazing thing about the BAM Act with this particular funding is that the state is required to match any rates raised. So it's a legislated funding model, so it doesn't require a budget bid for those match funds to be made available. It just forms part of that legislation, and that's quite an amazing source of revenue to have.
Cool.
8.
G'day everyone, can you hear me all right? Hello?
Yes.
I can hear you,
Okay.
sorry.
Sorry, it's just a new headset. I'm just getting used to it. I may have missed this because I was a little bit late to join the group. Beck, on the back of the DPR review process that's just happened, and given that we've still got submissions open for the BAMAC review, are you in a position to communicate any of the data that validates or supports people's objection to the rate itself, or to, you know, RBGs exclusively? You probably can't comment on the latter because the submission's still open, but if you've got any info about the data of respondees to, you know.
So the submissions are still coming in through the BAM Act. The most recent rate consultation that was undertaken, so that's a separate statutory process to the BAM Act review. The results of that are available on the department's website at this point in time. The process for the evaluation and looking at the model more broadly, there will be information going out and in. So we will be sharing those learnings throughout that process to inform the conversations, because it's really important that people have got that understanding of different perspectives and the different bits of information that we need to consider when looking at the model and providing the Minister with that support. So the answer is not now, but yes. Joe.
Yeah, me again. Is this the time to to raise a question more about the DPR and the issues that we encountered with it, or have you got a slot later on in the program for it?
That's probably not a question for me. Where's Kylie?
Okay, well, maybe we can move on to the next section, and then we are going to go into the breakout room, so maybe that might be a time. So what we'll do, we'll thank you very much, Rebecca and Rebecca, for being with us and providing your outline and update, and yeah, encourage anyone that hasn't put in a submission that would like to get it in and take a look at the DPED website. And so the closing date again was
27th, Wednesday, the 27th of July. So
yeah,
definitely encourage you to pop in a submission, even if it's brief. And if you can't, keep an eye out for other engagement opportunities later and participate in everything along that journey.
excellent.
Beautiful.
Thank
Thank you so much. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks. And you're welcome to stay, or if you need to go, that's fine as well, to Rebecca's. Okay, so now we'll move on to Linda, who's the Exec Officer for the Central Wheatbelt Biosecurity Association. And she's just going to give us an overview of the RBGs from a RBG group perspective. And yeah, just tell us a bit more about what they are and how they function and how to contact them. So I'll hand over to Linda.
Thanks, Kylie. I will jump in and I'll share my screen, but Kylie, really just wanted to share with your members today some more of the actual, I guess, as people in practice, or the practical things on what RBGs are doing across the state. So I've just got a couple of slides that I'll speak to. I'm just going to share my screen right now. How are you? Is it on sharing? Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to talk about a declared pest. We've been speaking already with Rebecca about it, but a declared pest is an animal or plant species that causes unwanted impacts on people, the economy, or the environment. It can be both either environmental or an agricultural weed, but it has to be declared by the Minister in Western Australia. Going back to those previous conversations, we have the national weeds of significance lists, we have environmental weeds lists, all of them have their role, but under the BAM Act and within Western Australia, RBGs can only spend and raise a rate and spend money on weeds that have been declared. And so on the right-hand side, you'll see a table, and that's got a summary of the key declared pests that are managed by the 14 RBGs across Western Australia at the moment. On the left-hand side are all the weeds that the RBGs are focusing on, and on the right are all the declared feral animals or declared pests that the 14 RBGs are working on. Some groups, or in most cases, are only focusing on one or two, which are very relevant to their region. But that gives you a picture of what the RBGs are working on. So it's very targeted and very specific. Just trying to drive this. I'm sorry about that. It's just jumping now. So RBGs, I just want to go around what we do. We're quite specific overall in what we can do once recognised. So number one is we're an incorporated association in our own right. And we operate under the Incorporated Associations Act, like many of you as Landcare groups and networks across the state. We then go through a process of recognition, which then makes us a Recognised Biosecurity Group, which is another governance process managed under the Act. From there, I've summarised it into 9 areas. Our key role is around awareness, so organising local information. And any of my colleagues on this call jump in at any point. But number 2, our key thing is engagement. So it's local group processes, local communities, very much a local approach. 3, we work in forming partnerships and building partnerships with all the other stakeholders, whether that's other community groups, agricultural landholders, industry, local government, and then particularly with the state, because they're a major landholder, stakeholder within the pest and weed space. So there. We have then the government compliances that come with being an incorporated association. Most of us, or all of us, are managed by boards or committees and have subcommittees underneath. And then within that, we either have staffing arrangements or we have contractors that work for us. So that's within that space. And then we have a role of Rbg compliance that we have to do to meet our requirements under the Act to be an Rbg. We have strategic plans and operational plans. And we have to produce yearly operational plans under the Act to enable us to access the funds that are in the declared pest account. And that is annually, and we only receive those funds on a 12-monthly basis at the moment. Most groups have what are called local area statements of practice that are species specific. So that is, what is the current best practice management control tools for that weed or pest in that region, and what are we going on about? Some of these are in different forms and documents, but overall it's a local statement about how we expect those weeds or pests to be controlled at a landscape scale within our designated region. The next job is the implementation of these operational plans. Each year our operational plans are submitted to the department for approval and then need to be endorsed by the minister in that space to enable our funding to come around, and there's a whole cycle based around that. Within those operational plans, there's usually a series of projects, and the Rbg's job over the next 12 months is then to do that day-to-day project management of implementing those control programs, from scheduling, contractors. Many of our projects, we try to leverage cost sharing arrangements, even though we've got the DPA and the 50-50 with the state. There's always looking to increase and enhance value and get other cost sharing arrangements within. And the final part around it is the monitoring and reporting. We're required under the Act to produce an annual report, and this annual report is submitted to the department and it has to be published on our websites and on the department's website. And that is your number 1 document that you need to go to. And in the chat, I'll put the link up to, where you'll go and find what your local Rbg or any of the Rbgs across the state are actually doing, the money they're receiving, the control programs they're implementing, and the results they're getting to date are usually published within that annual report. And it's also a requirement that our operational plans are published on our websites as well. And my main message around that is that the key of Rbgs is around its local people, local decisions, local pests at that very localised scale, and that is the key benefit as an Rbg we see for your community. Just wanted to touch on what we think a successful Rbg looks like. So for us, it's about an engaged and resilient community, actively managing across a whole landscape, that we have legitimacy within the community, an agreed compliance regime in partnership with the community, reduction in the impact of agreed priority established pests, a sense of ownership and where landholders see value in paying the DPR, establishment and maintenance of relevant partnerships to allow this to happen, and sustainable over the long term. So Kylie, that's really, in a very short nutshell, what I've put together as an overarching taster of Rbgs, and I'm happy to answer any questions or jump into some rooms and talk at a more local level.
Thanks very much, Linda. Yeah, that was really helpful. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions for Linda in the big group, and then we'll split into this 2 groups after
There
that.
is a question there in the chat from Kathy Dawson, wondering if you need to undertake additional insurance for doggers.
Kathy, doggers or the licensed pest management technicians that we employ have some of their own insurance, but us as an organisation also takes out a range of insurance policies. As you know, anything in the pest management space, particularly we're dealing with chemicals, firearms, poisons, is high risk, and there's a whole suite of tools and practices we need to put in place through our work health and safety procedures and insurances to make sure that we're minimising the risk for everyone.
Thanks. Joe?
Hey, Linda, good to see you. And thanks for your presentation again. You always do a marvellous job. Just adding on to that question, though, when there comes to be state-owned land within your territory, how are you now managing the LPMT liability and the restricted chemical permits? How's that going now?
There's still a space that is uncertain, and we've been working very hard over the last 18 months in particular to resolve the issue around working on state managed lands and the issues of RCP permits. But because it's a multi-pronged approach with both the Department of Health, DBCA and DPIRD, it's taking its time. Currently, all the RBGs have had their existing permits extended till the 31st of December, and we're hopeful that in coming months that we can start working towards resolution, but it hasn't been without its challenges.
Okay, so is that an issue that can be addressed in the BAM Act review? Is it something
not particularly because it's not managed, doesn't come under the BAM Act, it comes under the Department of Health. The RCP permits is legislation of the Department of Health, so it's been a different stream that we have to negotiate under. Like I say, I'm very happy that we've all been extended again to the 31st of December. Our region, like our existing MOUs, have all been extended. So, yeah, there's some positives in that space, but it hasn't been without its challenges, and particularly in the last 4 weeks for some of our groups where we've had a 30 June deadline originally this year.
I wonder how that can be resolved at a high level.
Okay. Sorry, I think we need to move to the rooms now, so we can continue and we'll have some different conversation in the rooms as well. So like I said before, you can self-select the rooms. I can't see. I'm just gonna
back. I've just had to put my hand over my mouth in shock because I forgot to record, Kylie.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
So we're all back. Everyone's back in the room. So,
I don't think we've lost anyone.
Hopefully not. We might have lost a couple. Okay, well, I hope you all found that useful, splitting into the groups. So I just wanted a quick 2-minute report back from each of the groups on the main points. So is someone from the Southwest able to do that?
Yeah, I can do it. So overall, the points for the whole breakout room, or
yeah, just in a couple of minutes. Is that okay, Teal?
Yep, I think mostly the discussion was on the challenges of delivering biosecurity support to such a diverse range of landholders and a high number of them as well. So it's harder to report results when you can't use the number of maybe controlled animals, whereas we try to focus on the number of events that we have provided, the number of attendees, our engagement levels and things like that. But yeah, it's difficult when you have, we have 8,000 people in our area. So how do we monitor the results of how effective we are, especially if we're not getting the support of the department?
Yep. Okay, thank you very much, Teal. And Linda,
Yeah, so for our room, we didn't get many non-RBG people join us. So we had the opportunity to share with Kylie about what we're working on and how we work with other groups within our region. And most of us, and my overall impression, do a really good job of networking out to our other groups in our region, because we're quite, I guess, more remote than the Southwest, and we have some good networks. So, but very targeted in the species, and very much, I guess, within the agricultural space is based on on pests such as the wild dog control, but also in the rangelands, some weeds, particularly Dick up north has some great programs in the weed space, and cactus out in the goldfields. So I don't know, Kylie, you were in that room. I saw you're madly taking notes. So anything you want to add?
Yes, no, that gives a good summary of what we discussed.
I think a bit of a takeaway from that for me, hearing Linda's summary and doing the work that I did years ago with Southwest Catchments Council and the RBGs, being co-located with DPIRD and working with the senior execs who were rolling out the rated system. I'm not sure what's going to happen out of the review. It's not for Wallen to call it, but I'd be surprised if there were not some very big changes to the system if it does persist. Or endure, I should say, not persist. I don't mean that in a negative sense, but I think that the rangelands and the broader acre settings it's easier to understand how it might work. When you hear the challenges that Teal and Kate have in peri-urban, and the absolute diversity and the numbers of stakeholders, and trying to engage all of those people for the relatively small amounts of money is very, very challenging. It's a very challenging way to tackle something that used to be a state government responsibility.
Unfortunately, what could happen from that is those challenges are used as an argument not to have an RBG in the Southwest. And then I think it will just revert back to what it was before, where there's a real absence of support to landholders. And it would be really unfortunate to see that happen in response to a very tiny amount of people who have never wanted the DPR in the first place. And in a way, I think an RBG's their job in the space, and like Linda put up with her in her presentation, is not so much about taking on the responsibility of reducing and eradicating established pests across the whole land. It's about, is there support for landholders? And if the department tries to say that an RBG isn't providing support because they can't say that everyone's 100% happy, or they haven't been able to provide metrics that don't exist yet, then, the hundreds of people that we've already been engaging with over the last 3 months, their inquiries for support are invalidated almost. And that's going to be really sad if that is the outcome of the review, that they focus on the negatives rather than the positives, because I think, like the consultation summary that they put out, we had 44 people put in a submission that was negative. The other day we had a feral pig workshop and we had 38 people attend, so that we almost had more people attend that one set of workshops than we did have people who submitted their argument against a DPR. So the successes of RBGs, I don't feel like are promoted enough by the department.
So it was well said, Teal. I think, the opportunity now, Jack, what you're saying though, is about making sure what is the viable alternative. Whilst we may have many challenges as RBGs, what is the, people actually need to put forward in their submissions to the BAMAC review or in discussions about what you see as a viable alternative, because from our experience so far, and going back to a state department led in this space, will be detrimental to community over being a community-led model. And I think that's the strength of our model. And there's definitely got some flaws within it and challenges that we all need to face and would like to see addressed as a part of the review, but we don't want to see RBGs not here. Or if it is, it has to be an alternative. Don't say, oh, they're not being effective. It needs to be, what is the alternative model?
That's a really good point. And, there's been lots of learnings that have come out of this that surely can be assessed and understood and built upon. you know, build on the successes that have happened to date. So fascinating space, and just so much to do. And hearing about hog on is great. I love the whole hog on solution to pigs at the moment. It's uplifting to feel like sometimes you can feel that, you know, we're not getting on top of our feral problems, and at other times you hear these breakthroughs and you think, yep, our innovation and our resilience, we're breaking through.
Can I just make a very quick comment? I didn't put my hand up, so sorry. Just on that note, it's really hard to promote these successes in terms of, you know, comms and Facebook and social media really don't like to hear about things dying. That's a fundamental social license issue that would impact all the groups. So I say in confidence, you know, to the group, yes, we're getting 6 pigs every couple of months, and I can't do anything with that information. It's only wonderful to the people that are actually receiving the service. So we can try and get testimonials and try and get qualitative ways of capturing that without treading on toes. Believe me, and I think Peel Harvey as well, we'd be deeply invested in all the social media groups, and they can be a real blessing or they can be a real challenge. So that's just, it's hard to toot your own horn sometimes. I don't know what the answer is.
Yes, we just had someone leave a message on our phones abusing us for having an ad for our fox and pizza night that showed a fox standing on top of some pizza boxes. They didn't go into detail about why it upset them, but they just said that we should have more respect because showing foxes and pizzas together was disrespectful because the fox was an animal too. I don't know if they thought we were putting the fox in the pizza or what.
I think it was meat lovers. It was a variation on meat lovers.
Yeah.
You can have a fox on your pizza.
They did go into detail, but yeah, just when you think you've ticked all the boxes, there'll be another box there that you didn't realise existed.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. I'll send a follow-up email with a link to the recording. And yeah, if you have anything further to add, please feel free to email. Oh, hang on. What have I done there? Please feel free to email us. And I think and the next thing we've got, our next Landcare Checks in is on Tuesday, the 16th of August at 1:30, and that's an update from the WA Forest Alliance, and Jess Beckerling, their convener, will be presenting to us. So thank you once again for all attending, and it's been great to hear what the RBGs are doing and where you are all in the space. And yeah, hopefully we can build some more connections with your groups.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep up the great work.
Yes.
Ivan had his hand up. But he's gone.